The courtroom was hushed. Every head turned as the elderly man in the wheelchair was rolled to the witness stand. His frame was frail now, but his chest still carried the proud ribbons of service pinned to his jacket. A veteran of 2 tours overseas, a man who had sacrificed more than most Americans could imagine. The bailiff swore him in. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" His voice cracked, but it was steady. "I do." Then he looked across the courtroom at the HOA board members who had mocked him, harassed him, and belittled his service. The same neighbors who had laughed when he raised his flag on September 11th and told him he wasn't allowed to clutter the neighborhood with old war memories. Now, those same people sat behind a defense table, pale and sweating, because the court was about to make them pay. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to hit subscribe, like, and ring the bell so you never miss shocking true stories of HOA abuse, petty neighbor feuds, and justice served. To understand how it got this far, we have to go back to the quiet cul-de-sac where Tom Harrison lived, a retired Army sergeant who had fought in the Gulf War and served in the early days of the War on Terror. Tom was a simple man. He loved his morning coffee, his classic rock records, and most of all, his American flag. Every September, as the anniversary of 9/11 approached, he would hang that flag high and proud. For him, it wasn't decoration, it was memory, a tribute to brothers he had lost in battle and to the thousands of innocent lives taken that day. But to the Willow Oaks HOA, it was non-compliance. The first letter came in September 2015. "Your flag is not in accordance with HOA regulations regarding outdoor decor. Please remove it immediately or face a $250 fine." Tom crumpled the letter, shaking his head. "They're really going to fine me for my flag on 9/11. His son Michael tried to keep him calm. "Dad, I'll talk to them. Maybe it's just a mistake." But it wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning. At the next HOA meeting, Tom showed up in his veteran's cap, the same one he'd worn on base years ago. He stood when it was his turn to speak. "With all due respect, this flag isn't decor. It's my service. It's remembrance. I'll lower it at night, I'll maintain it, but I won't take it down." The room was silent for a moment, until one of the board members chuckled. "We all respect your service, Tom, but rules are rules. This is a neighborhood, not Arlington." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tom's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He just gathered his things and left. That night, Michael found him sitting on the porch, staring at the flagpole. "They laughed at me, son. After everything, they laughed." He knelt beside him. "Then we fight back, not with anger, with the law." The harassment escalated from there. More fines, notes taped to the door, remove non-compliant symbols. Even complaints about Tom's front porch chair, the one he sat in every morning while listening to his radio. One morning, Michael caught 2 board members snapping photos of the house. When he confronted them, one smirked. "Patriotism is fine, but we don't need a military museum on this street." Michael's fists clenched. He wanted to hit them, but he remembered his father's words. "We don't fight with fists anymore. We fight with proof." So they gathered every letter, every fine, every photo. And soon, their quiet battle with the HOA would explode into a full-blown lawsuit. What would you do if your father was mocked for flying the flag he fought under? Would you pay the fines or take the fight to court? Share your thoughts in the comments. The following year,
September rolled around again. The air was crisp, flags waved across the city, and memorials filled the news. But in Willow Oaks, the HOA had a different agenda. Tom raised his flag as he always did on the morning of September 11th. He stood at attention, saluted, and lowered his head for a long moment of silence. For him, it was sacred. For the HOA board, it was a violation. By noon, another letter was taped to his door. Non-compliant display noted. Daily fines will be assessed until removal. Tom ripped the paper down. "This is harassment, Dad." Tom only shook his head. "I've fought worse than paper pushers." But later that day, when they passed by the community clubhouse, they overheard laughter. Two board members were leaning against the wall, mocking in hushed tones. "Look at Harrison out there, saluting his little Paul like he's still in uniform." "Yeah, someone should tell him the war's over. Maybe then he'd stop living in the past." Michael's blood boiled. He stormed forward, fists clenched, but Tom gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Stand down, son," he said firmly. "We don't fight their way. We fight in court." That night, Michael contacted an attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases. He handed over the stack of letters, the photos, the Facebook comments, and even a voice recording he had secretly captured of their mocking toast. The attorney shook his head. "This isn't just harassment, it's discrimination. Veterans have rights, and what they've done is a violation of federal law." Tom frowned. "Federal law?" The attorney nodded. "The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act. No HOA can stop a homeowner from flying the U.S. flag as long as it's displayed respectfully. And mocking a veteran for his service, that goes beyond rules. That's defamation, harassment, and emotional distress." Michael's jaw tightened. "Then let's file. They want to fight, they'll get a fight." Word spread quickly. The lawsuit hit the neighborhood like a bombshell. Some neighbors applauded, others grumbled, but everyone knew Willow Oaks HOA was in trouble. The board scoffed publicly, calling it frivolous, but behind closed doors, they panicked. Because now it wasn't just about fines and flags, it was about the law. And the law was on Tom Harrison's side.
The lawsuit made headlines in their small town almost immediately. Veteran sues HOA over flag restrictions and harassment. The local paper splashed the story across its front page. A radio station picked it up. Soon talk shows were buzzing. Can a homeowners association really fine a veteran for flying the American flag, especially on 9/11? Neighbors whispered in driveways. Some nodded approvingly when they saw Michael helping his father into the car. Others muttered angrily about troublemakers. The community that once prided itself on quiet lawns and neat hedges was suddenly a battlefield of loyalty and resentment. The HOA board lawyered up quickly. Their attorney, a sharp-suited man named Reynolds, stood tall at the first pretrial hearing. "This lawsuit is an overreaction. The HOA respects all residents, including Mr. Harrison. However, bylaws must be enforced consistently. Exceptions undermine order." Michael shot to his feet, unable to stay silent. "Consistently? Then why am I holding letters only addressed to my father? Why are there recordings of board members mocking his service?" The judge banged the gavel. "Mr. Harrison, you'll have your turn." Tom touched his son's arm gently. "Patience, son. We'll win this the right way." Discovery unearthed damning evidence.
Emails between board members surfaced, dripping with disdain. Old man Harrison needs to move on from the past. This isn't a military base. He can salute his flag in his backyard. Honestly, I'm tired of his sob stories. He's milking his service for sympathy. When Michael read the emails aloud at his attorney's office, his hand shook. They didn't just mock you, Dad. They mocked everyone who served. Tom's voice was quiet, but firm. Then they mocked the wrong soldier. The trial began in late August, just weeks before another 9/11 anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The courtroom filled with veterans, neighbors, and reporters. American flags dotted the gallery, small pins, ties, even scarves, silent gestures of solidarity. On the stand, Tom was asked to explain why the flag mattered so much. His hands trembled as he held the microphone, but his voice was clear. I raised that flag every September because it's not just cloth to me. It's the faces of men I buried. It's the sound of bagpipes at funerals. It's the promise that this country remembers. He paused, his eyes glistening. When they told me to take it down, it wasn't just about rules. It was about erasing memory, erasing sacrifice. And I won't let that happen. The gallery sniffled. A few veterans wiped their eyes. The HOA fought hard. Attorney Reynolds argued, the flag was never banned outright. We only required compliance with placement rules, pole height, visibility, and location. Mr. Harrison refused to comply, and the board acted within its rights. But Michael leaned forward, slamming a binder onto the table. Then why the mocking emails? Why the recordings? Why the public humiliation? This wasn't about rules. The jury leaned in, their faces hardening. At recess, one board member cornered Michael in the hallway. You think you're a hero? You're tearing this community apart. Michael glared back. No, you did that. The moment you laughed at a man who gave more for this country than you ever will. The board member muttered something under his breath and walked away. But the damage was already done. The jurors had seen. As the trial stretched on, tension grew thick. Every witness, every piece of evidence tilted the scale further. By the second week, it was clear. The HOA wasn't just defending rules. They were defending arrogance. And arrogance doesn't win against truth. The stage was set for a verdict that would shake Willow Oaks and send a message far beyond its white picket fences.
The second week of trial brought fireworks. Witness after witness was called, and the HOA board's arrogance began to unravel under oath. First came Linda, a longtime neighbor who had lived across the street from Tom for nearly 20 years. She clutched her purse nervously as she took the stand, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. I was there the day they mocked him, she said, her eyes fixed on the jury. He stood tall, saluting his flag, and they laughed on September 11th. I'll never forget it. I thought it was cruel. The jury scribbled notes, some shaking their heads. Then came Paul, another resident. He admitted he once sided with the HOA, believing rules were rules, but the more he saw, the more disgusted he became. They didn't find anyone else like that, just Tom. And I heard them call him a washed-up soldier. That's when I knew it wasn't about rules, it was personal. The HOA attorney tried to poke holes, but the damage was done.
Each witness painted the same picture: targeted harassment thinly disguised as bylaw enforcement. During cross-examination, Reynolds grew frustrated. "Mrs. Garvey, isn't it true that Mr. Harrison's flagpole was taller than regulations allow?" Linda nodded. "Yes, but everyone else with tall flagpoles was ignored. Only his became an issue. Why?" The courtroom buzzed. Even the judge leaned forward, eyebrow raised. By midweek, public opinion had swung hard. Veterans groups rallied outside the courthouse, holding flags and signs, "Respect our heroes." Local news crews captured interviews with supporters, their voices trembling with outrage. "He fought for our country, and now he has to fight his neighbors for a flag? That's shameful," one veteran barked. The HOA board members avoided the cameras, ducking into side doors, their once proud posture now bent under public scrutiny. Inside the courtroom, Tom kept his dignity. He listened quietly, never raising his voice, never lashing out. His calm presence only made the HOA look more bitter. Michael, on the other hand, was fire. When given the chance to speak, he turned to the jury with a voice that cut through the silence. "My father spent 20 years serving this country. He came home with scars, with memories that still wake him at night, and instead of gratitude, he was mocked, he was fined, he was humiliated. If that can happen to him, it can happen to any veteran. And if we don't stop it here, when does it end?" Some jurors shifted in their seats, visibly moved. The HOA's defense grew weaker by the day. Reynolds tried to downplay the mocking emails as jokes taken out of context. He tried to argue that enforcing bylaws equally means sometimes hard feelings. But then the prosecution dropped the bombshell, a recording Michael had captured during that fateful clubhouse event. "Let's all give a hand to Sergeant Harrison, protector of porch flags everywhere." The audio played. Tom's hands trembled slightly as the audio played, but his eyes remained locked forward. Reynolds objected furiously, but the judge allowed it. "The jury will consider this evidence." And they considered it, they did. Their faces hardened, their pens flew across notepads. By the end of that day, the tide had fully turned. The gallery buzzed with whispers, "They're done. The HOA's finished." Michael leaned close to his father. "We've got them, Dad." Tom nodded slowly. "Justice doesn't come quick, son, but it comes." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. One asked Michael, "What do you hope this case proves?" He didn't hesitate. That no veteran should ever be mocked for their service, not in this country, not ever. The crowd of supporters cheered, waving flags high. The HOA board members, once smug and confident, now sat pale in the shadows, realizing they were losing not just the case, but the community itself.
The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial neared its end. For nearly 2 weeks, testimony had poured out like floodwater, exposing the arrogance, the mockery, and the cruelty of the HOA board. Now all that remained were the closing arguments and the decision of 12 ordinary citizens. The prosecution went first. The attorney, a steady man named Jacobs, stepped into the center of the courtroom. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words cut sharper than any shout. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "you've heard the evidence, the emails, the recordings, the laughter. This is not about a flagpole being 6 inches too tall. This is about a man who served his country being mocked, humiliated, and targeted by those entrusted to uphold community standards fairly." He turned and gestured toward Tom, sitting silently in his wheelchair, ribbons shining faintly on his jacket. "This man gave 20 years of his life so these very neighbors could live in freedom. And how did they repay him? With fines, with insults, with laughter on the anniversary of 9/11. Jacobs paused, letting the words sink in. "Today, you have the power to say enough. Enough of the bullying, enough of the arrogance, enough of the disrespect to those who served. Find for Mr. Harrison, and let this community and the nation know that veterans are not to be mocked. They are to be honored." The gallery erupted into muffled sniffles. One juror dabbed her eyes. Then came the defense. Attorney Reynolds strode to the center, his tone clipped and sharp. "Yes, Mr. Harrison served. Yes, we thank him. But this case is not about service. It is about rules. Every homeowner signs the same agreement. Every homeowner is held to the same standard. If one man refuses, order collapses." He gestured dramatically. "Imagine a neighborhood where every person decides their own exceptions. Flags, statues, neon signs, chaos. The board acted to preserve fairness. Were jokes made? Yes. Were feelings hurt? Yes. But is that worth bankrupting an association and punishing volunteers? No." He paced before the jury, lowering his voice. "This case is about emotions clouding judgment. Don't let sympathy blind you to facts. Rules matter. Order matters. A verdict against the HOA is a verdict against community standards." He nodded firmly and returned to his seat. But the silence that followed wasn't supportive. It was heavy, hollow. The defense's words had landed, but they lacked heart. Jacobs rose for rebuttal, his voice clear. "Rules matter, but so does humanity. And when rules are used as weapons, when they are enforced selectively, when they become excuses for cruelty, then they cease to be rules, they become oppression. That is what happened here. And the law, federal law, protects the right to fly the American flag. The HOA violated that law, and in mocking Mr. Harrison, they violated something even greater: basic decency." He turned once more toward the jury. "Don't just follow the letter of the law. Follow its spirit, and send a message that respect for veterans is not optional, it's mandatory." The courtroom was silent as he sat down. The judge gave final instructions, then the jury was dismissed to deliberate. As they filed out, Michael squeezed his father's shoulder. "We've done everything we can. Now it's in their hands." Tom nodded, his voice low but certain. "Whatever happens, we stood our ground. That's all I ever asked."
The jury room door closed behind 12 strangers, leaving the courtroom buzzing with tension. Some predicted a quick verdict, others feared a long deadlock. But one thing was clear. The HOA had been exposed, and now justice waited just beyond the deliberation room.
The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. That alone spoke volumes. When the bailiff announced they had reached a decision, the courtroom filled within minutes. Neighbors who had skipped work, veterans in uniform, reporters clutching notepads, all crammed into the benches, waiting for history. "All rise," the bailiff commanded. The jury filed back in, solemn and steady. The foreperson, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, clutched the verdict form. The judge nodded. "Has the jury reached a decision?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. In the case of Harrison versus Willow Oaks Homeowners Association, on the charge of violation of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Michael gripped his father's shoulder, holding his breath. On the charge of harassment and emotional distress, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Gasps rippled through the gallery. On the charge of defamation, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The final words rang like a hammer strike. We award damages to the plaintiff in the amount of $750,000. The room erupted. Veterans in the gallery clapped and wiped tears. Neighbors murmured, some in relief, some in shock. Reporters bolted for the doors to call in their stories. At the defense table, the HOA board members sat pale, stunned, their arrogance evaporated. One muttered under his breath, "We'll appeal," but his words sounded hollow to himself. Tom closed his eyes, his hands trembling. Not from weakness, but from release. 20 years in service had taught him to stand tall under fire, but nothing had prepared him for being mocked in his own neighborhood. Now justice had spoken. Colleen, the HOA president, finally broke the silence at the table. "This is ridiculous. We can't afford that kind of payout. It'll bankrupt us." The judge banged the gavel. "Order. The jury has spoken. This court is adjourned." As the gavel fell, the sound echoed like finality itself. Outside, the courthouse steps were alive with energy. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Harrison, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think this sets a national precedent? What message do you hope this sends?" Tom lifted a hand, his voice quiet but firm. "This was never about money. This was about respect. I've fought this country so people could live free, and that includes flying the flag. No HOA, no board, no group of neighbors will ever take that away from me or from anyone else who served." The crowd erupted into applause. Some veterans saluted, others shouted, "Amen." Michael stepped forward, his voice fiery. "This case isn't just about my father. It's about every veteran who's ever been told their sacrifice didn't matter. Today, the jury proved that it does." That night, back at home, Tom sat on the porch in his favorite chair. The flag waved gently in the breeze above him, lit by a small spotlight Michael had installed. For the first time in years, there were no letters, no fines, no threats. Just quiet, just respect. He sipped his coffee slowly, watching the stars appear one by one. Michael sat beside him. "You did it, Dad. We did it." Tom smiled faintly.
No, son. Justice did it. All we did was stand. The flag rippled softly in the night air, a symbol not just of sacrifice, but of resilience. And though scars remained, Tom knew this: the mockery had been silenced, the laughter had been crushed, respect had been restored.
The verdict sent shockwaves through Willow Oaks. By the next morning, every resident had heard the HOA had lost. The association owed nearly $750,000 in damages. For years, the board had ruled with smug certainty, issuing fines for everything from mailbox colors to lawn heights. Now, the empire of pettiness was crumbling. At the HOA office, a tense emergency meeting unfolded. "We can't pay this," one board member groaned, his head in his hands. "We barely have enough in reserves for landscaping, let alone this judgment." Another snapped, "Raise dues, special assessments." But Colleen, the president, slammed her folder shut. "Don't you get it? If we raise dues now, people will revolt. We're finished. We'll be sued again. We'll lose everything." Her voice trembled, the confidence gone. For the first time, the board looked less like rulers and more like captives of their own arrogance. In the neighborhood, residents were divided. Some muttered angrily at the mailbox cluster, "Now our fees will skyrocket because of that lawsuit." Others shook their heads. They brought this on themselves. They mocked a veteran. They deserved to lose. But slowly, something shifted. Signs began appearing in front yards, small flags planted in gardens, notes taped to Tom's mailbox. "We stand with you." For years, Tom had been isolated, targeted. Now his neighbors were finally rallying. Reporters kept calling. National news outlets picked up the story. On a morning show, Michael sat beside his father, telling the world what had happened. "My dad didn't fight wars just to come home and fight his HOA. This verdict proves respect is not optional. It's a right." Tom smiled faintly, lifting his cap. "I didn't ask for praise. I only asked for dignity. And now maybe others like me won't have to ask at all." The clip went viral. Veterans across the country shared it, commenting, "This could have been me. Finally, justice." Meanwhile, back in Willow Oaks, cracks in the HOA widened into chasms. Several board members resigned, unwilling to face the humiliation. The association's lawyer quit, citing irreconcilable differences. Lawsuits from other residents over years of petty fines piled up. At the next community meeting, the clubhouse was overflowing. Residents demanded answers. "You cost us everything," one woman shouted. "You humiliated this neighborhood," another added. Colleen tried to regain control, banging a gavel. "Order! Order!" But the crowd drowned her out. The once feared HOA president was now the most hated woman on Willow Oaks Lane. By the end of the night, she had resigned in disgrace. For Tom, the victory was sweet, but also humbling. One evening, as he sat on his porch, Linda came by with tears in her eyes. "I should have spoken up sooner," she whispered. "I saw what they were doing, and I stayed quiet. I'm sorry." Tom gave her a gentle smile. "It takes courage to speak at all, and you're speaking now." Wordlessly, she planted a small flag in his yard before walking away. Michael, ever protective, kept asking, "Dad, do you feel safe now?" Tom nodded slowly. "Safer than I felt in years, not because of the money, not even because we won in court, but because people finally saw. They saw the truth." He looked up at the flag waving in the night breeze, lit proudly by the spotlight. "And maybe, just maybe, they'll remember next time. Mocking a veteran doesn't end in laughter. It ends in justice." By September 11th of the following year, the transformation was complete. Dozens of flags lined Willow Oaks Lane. Children painted red, white, and blue signs. Neighbors gathered at Tom's porch for a small ceremony. When Tom saluted that morning, he wasn't alone. The entire community stood with him. And in that unity, something stronger than fines or bylaws had taken root: respect.
The HOA of Willow Oaks never recovered. Within a year, the association dissolved entirely. The board disbanded, the bylaws were stripped down to essentials, and a new volunteer committee took over. This time, their focus was community, not control. For Tom, it was vindication. Not because the board collapsed, but because the neighborhood had finally remembered what mattered. On the morning of September 11th, a year after the trial, Tom sat on his porch in his old service jacket. The air was crisp, the sky a piercing blue, eerily similar to that morning 2 decades earlier. But this year was different. Flags flew from nearly every porch in Willow Oaks. Red, white, and blue lined the street. Children held small paper flags they'd made in school. Even neighbors who once stayed silent now stood proudly at the curb. Michael wheeled his father down the driveway to the sidewalk, where the crowd had gathered. Linda stepped forward, holding a folded piece of paper. Her voice trembled as she read, "We gather today not only to remember 9/11, but to honor Sergeant Tom Harrison, our neighbor, our veteran, and our friend." The crowd applauded, quiet but powerful. Tom blinked back tears. He had faced war abroad and injustice at home, and now, standing in his own street, he finally felt something he hadn't in years: belonging. Later that evening, Tom sat with Michael on the porch, coffee in hand. The flag above them rippled softly in the night air, lit from below. "You know, son," Tom said quietly, "I never fought for applause. I never fought for parades. I fought so people could live freely, even the ones who mocked me." Michael frowned. "And do you forgive them, after everything?" Tom took a long sip, then nodded slowly. "Forgive, yes. Forget, no. Their laughter taught me something. Freedom doesn't mean much if you let people trample it. Sometimes you've got to stand your ground. That's what we did." Michael's eyes softened. "And we won." Tom smiled faintly. "No, justice won. That's bigger than us." Across town, the case had sparked change. Other HOAs reviewed their bylaws, careful not to infringe on veterans' rights. Legal newsletters called it a landmark case for homeowners associations nationwide. Veterans groups cited it in speeches, reminding communities to honor service, not belittle it. Tom's story had become bigger than Willow Oaks. It had become a symbol. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Tom stood with effort, bracing himself on Michael's arm. He faced the flagpole, raising his hand in one last salute for the day. His back ached, his legs trembled, but his salute was steady. He whispered under his breath, almost like a prayer, "You can mock a man, you can fine him, you can even try to erase his dignity, but you can't erase the flag, and you can't erase what it stands for." Michael watched quietly, pride swelling in his chest. And as the flag lowered slowly into the night, father and son knew one thing for certain: this battle, at least, was over.